As I relaxed, an announcement echoed through the cabin. "If there is a doctor on board, please come forward." It was the kind of urgent announcement you'd only expect to hear in a drama. Feeling uneasy, I stayed seated and noticed a woman who had been sitting beside me earlier walking hurriedly down the aisle. Then, as if noticing me, she turned and approached, her face on the verge of tears. "You're a doctor, aren't you?" I widened my eyes in complete surprise. "My name is Mark Williams. I'm 32 years old. Right now, I'm aboard a flight, heading for a getaway at a resort spa to unwind from daily stress. After boarding, I stored my carry-on luggage in the overhead bin. When I heard a soft voice. Turning, I saw a petite, charming woman holding her ticket and staring at me. "Oh, sorry. Am I in your way? Please, go ahead." Thinking she was headed further down, I stepped aside, but she shook her head. "No, this is my seat, right next to yours." She showed me her ticket, marked 12E. "Oh, then I should sit first. I'm 12F by the window." "Want me to stow your bag?" I asked, and she tilted her head slightly. "Really, but it's no problem." As she hesitated, an older man behind her greeted me warmly. The woman puffed her cheeks at him. "Grandpa, stop causing trouble." Ignoring her protests, I quickly placed her bag in the overhead compartment. "Thank you." Being tall, this is an easy task for me. "It's nothing." With that, I took my seat by the window. Since the aisle was getting crowded, it was better to sit quickly. The woman timidly murmured, "Excuse me," as she took her seat beside me. The older man sat on the aisle seat, grumbling. I wanted the window seat, only to be gently scolded by the woman. "Would you like to switch seats?" I offered, but the woman quickly shook her head, repeatedly apologizing, leaving me to focus on my paperback. But for some reason, I could feel her glancing at me now and then. Did she want to say something? Maybe I should have just sat down without helping with the luggage. Perhaps reacting to her grandfather's complaint had been a mistake. It seemed my gesture of kindness made her feel obligated. I seemed to tend to overthink things. I pulled out my eye mask and put it on. Though I'd planned to enjoy the in-flight soup service, I decided to take a nap instead. I only intended to sleep briefly, but loud voices pierced through my subconscious. I removed my mask and checked my watch. 40 minutes had passed. Oh, I slept straight through. Startled, I stared at the mask in my hand. Not like this is work. I sighed inwardly and glanced to my side. Both the woman and the older man were gone. Perhaps they'd gone to the lavatory together. They seemed close. As I sat there, an announcement broke through my thoughts. "If there is a doctor on board, please come forward." The urgency in the voice was something straight out of a movie. I glanced around, but none of the passengers seemed inclined to stand up. Still feeling uneasy, I fixed my gaze forward, remaining in my seat. Then I saw the woman who had been sitting nearby walking down the aisle with a panicked expression. Before I could process it, she turned to me with tears brimming in her eyes and spoke directly to me. "You're a doctor, aren't you?" I widened my eyes in shock. "What?" Confused and unable to grasp the situation, I responded awkwardly. "You work at Boston General Hospital, Dr. Williams, right? Please help me. I'm begging you." She accurately named my former workplace, leaving me bewildered. The surrounding passengers began to murmur. Sensing the tension, I quickly tried to explain. "Well, actually, I quit. I'm not a doctor anymore." Hearing my words, the woman's eyes welled up with tears, and her expression turned desperate. I couldn't just ignore someone looking like that. I'm not heartless. With everyone's eyes on me, staying seated, and doing nothing wasn't an option. "All right, I'll just take a quick look." As I stood up, she let out a tearful, "Thank you. Please, this way." She quickly walked ahead, leading me down the aisle. I followed her. When we arrived, I saw her grandfather lying down, struggling to breathe in shallow gasps. 2 flight attendants perked up at my arrival, but, "Sorry, I don't have anything to prove I'm a doctor. I also resigned recently. Is there anything I can do to help?" My admission caused the flight attendants to exchange uneasy glances. I knew they couldn't let me use the onboard medical kit without proper credentials. Their expressions confirmed my suspicion, so I turned my attention to the elderly man. "Can you hear me?" "Hello." Unsure of what to say, I glanced at the woman. She seemed to understand and stammered, Johnson, Leonardo." Quick on her feet, she provided his name. "Good, that's a start. Leonardo. Can you hear me? Are you in pain?" Leonardo gave a weak nod. I loosened his clothing slightly and checked his pulse. It must be painful. It was rapid, and his skin felt cold. He was gasping, opening and closing his mouth as if desperate for air. An idea struck me, and I grabbed his leg. His reaction confirmed my hunch. Using oxygen would have been ideal, but for now, calming his breathing took priority. "Leonardo, try to breathe slowly, as slow as you can. That's it." While giving instructions, I massaged his legs. They were slightly swollen, and when I pressed down, the indentation didn't immediately return. There wasn't much else I could do at the moment. Praying silently for his recovery, I continued massaging his legs, and eventually his breathing eased. Leonardo raised his hand slightly and exhaled softly. "Thank you." I exhaled as well, relieved. "Good. For now you should be all right. Please go straight to a hospital when we land." I was deeply relieved it hadn't escalated further. The woman expressed her gratitude repeatedly, though she didn't need to be so formal. Fortunately, his condition stabilized enough that we could return to our seats. The flight attendants stayed nearby, ready to assist if needed. He had recovered enough to massage his own foot and was moving it slightly. Seeing this, the woman gave a heartfelt "thank you." Once again, "Thank you so much." I gestured to stop her. "No, really. It's enough. There's no need to thank me repeatedly. I didn't even do anything major, so it's honestly embarrassing." Hearing this, she looked slightly troubled. Sensing that her gratitude still felt incomplete, I decided to change the topic. "By the way, why did you?" I hesitated, and she smiled gently. "You helped me back then as well." "Oh, I haven't introduced myself yet. My name is Angela Johnson. About 6 months ago, you helped my niece." Then she began to explain the story. Angela lived in a small town about a 2-hour flight from Boston, where her sister Lena resided. 6 months ago, Lena was about to have her second child in Boston. Since Lena's husband was abroad for infertility treatments, Angela stayed in Boston for a month to help with her 3-year-old niece and care for Lena post-delivery. Then the accident happened. It was right after Lena had gone into labor and headed to the maternity hospital. While Angela was washing dishes after dinner, her 3-year-old niece fell off the couch during a brief moment of inattention. The fall wasn't from a great height, but the landing was unfortunate. She landed face first and cut her lower lip with her teeth. Blood poured from her lower lip, and Angela panicked. She called the hospital Lena had mentioned for emergencies and was told to bring the child immediately. I was the one who greeted them at the hospital, working in the emergency department at the time. Hearing this story, I smiled wryly. "So that's what you mean by helping." "It was just my job. Nothing extraordinary." Angela smiled softly. "That might be true, but at that moment, when I ran into the hospital, feeling utterly desperate. You looked like an god to me. An exaggerated claim. You took a quick look at the wound and asked me whether we should stitch it or not. I had no idea what to do. If we didn't, she'd be in pain for days and struggle to eat. If we did, it would hurt initially, but the procedure would make it easier for her. I held my head in my hands. Far from an god. I had given her a cruel choice. Yet Angela was smiling as she reminisced. I couldn't decide back then. I wasn't her parent. Lena was in labor and unavailable, and her husband was overseas. It felt like her fate rested entirely on my decision, and it terrified me. So I asked you, what would you do if she were your child? Apparently, I had answered without hesitation. I'd stitch it. Of course, I would. Even now, I'd give the same answer. Stitches will leave a much cleaner scar. Angela nodded at my words. You said the exact same thing back then. However, she admitted she hesitated upon hearing that the procedure would be challenging. She worried about being a burden. Then you smiled and said, "Don't worry. We're professionals. You can trust us." Embarrassing. It's nothing during work hours, but hearing it sober feels utterly mortifying. Seeing my ears turn red, Angela giggled softly. I felt really reassured. You helped me so much back then too, she said, expressing her gratitude once more. Well, it was just my job. But you remembered, huh? Feeling a little embarrassed, I asked her that. Angela pointed at the small table in front of the seat. Following her gaze, I saw the sleep mask I had been using earlier. Clearly printed on it was my name, Mark Williams. My face turned red. It's for naps. Everyone has similar ones, so we have to put our names on them. But normally, people don't remember the names of her doctors, right? I said nervously. Angela hesitated for a moment before muttering, "Should I say it?" That small murmur gave me a clue. My name matched that of a famous person. It wasn't always this way. When I was young, my dad passed away, and my mom remarried, changing my last name. Having the same name is one thing, but even if I stay quiet, people say my demeanor resembles his. When I saw you today, I thought maybe, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. When I saw the name on your sleep mask, I was sure I was going to speak to you after you woke up. But then Grandpa had that incident. I smiled wryly. Well, thanks to you remembering me, I could help a little. I don't carry my medical license around, and my credentials and old workplace business cards were left in the bag I used for commuting. Oh, but since I quit, I wouldn't have been able to use the card anyway, I explained. Angela looked a little disappointed. Why did you quit? You're such an amazing doctor. The high praise made me a bit uncomfortable. Oh, no. It's more like I wasn't cut out for it. I had wanted to save lives, so I became a doctor. I joined the aita to be closer to life and death situations. But the grueling workload began to take its toll on my heart. Every day brought split-second life or death decisions, where one wrong move could have grave consequences. On top of that, the hospital director was oppressive, quick to scold over any mistake. Eventually, I grew weary of that life. So I left medicine. I thought I'd take a break and rejuvenate myself. That's why I'm headed to a spa in the city right now. As I said that, Angela looked like she had something on her mind. Have you already decided where to stay? She asked, tilting her head. I've got the first night booked, but I'm still figuring out the rest. That city has so many great resort spas, doesn't it? The city had numerous resort spas and accommodations, and I was undecided about where to stay. I thought about visiting various places and settling on one I liked for a few days. Basically, I had no real plan. Angela blushed a little before saying, Then, why don't you stay at our guest house? We'd love to have you as our guest, as a way to thank you. Right, Grandpa. She turned to her grandfather, solidifying the offer. I hesitated but realized that Angela's family's guest house was in the very city I was heading toward. It felt like fate. After parting ways with Angela and her family at the airport, I headed to my hotel for the first night. The resort spa was fantastic, offering a breathtaking view and a spacious, luxurious environment. The next day, Angela came to pick me up from the hotel, and we headed straight to the guest house owned by her parents. Leonardo had undergone tests at the hospital afterward, but it seemed there were no significant issues. The doctor explained that a small blood clot had temporarily caused breathing difficulties, but it likely dissolved during the treatment, which brought relief to Angela. After an hour-long drive, we arrived at Angela's parents' guest house. Wow, this guest house looks incredibly luxurious. The words slipped out naturally as I admired the majestic atmosphere of the place. Angela gave a shy smile, clearly pleased by my reaction. Thank you. This guest house has been in our family since my great-grandfather's time, so it's a bit old in places, but please make yourself comfortable. If you'd like, I can also show you around the area. I hesitated to accept, not wanting to impose, but she insisted. I'd love to revisit some local spots I haven't been to in a while. And so, she ended up accompanying me. She took me to places that were hard to reach without a car, as well as charming retro-style cafes known only to locals. Her curated tour made me feel quite lucky. Most of all, I found it irresistible how she became increasingly talkative, her enthusiasm revealing just how much she loved her hometown. Standing in front of a small waterfall, Angela took a deep breath. I followed her lead, and breathed deeply too. The crisp, cool air was refreshing. Ah, it's so calming here. I've been to Boston twice in the past 6 months, and the crowds there were just exhausting. Angela laughed as she spoke. The first trip was to support Lena after giving birth, and the second was because Leonardo insisted on visiting his grandchildren as soon as possible, with her accompanying him. My parents can't take a break from running the guest house, and Lena, well, she doesn't visit home much due to some issues, so I end up being the one who handles these trips. Not that I mind, I enjoy seeing my nieces and nephews. And honestly, whether I'm here at the guest house or not doesn't make much difference. She smiled wistfully as she said this, a hint of sadness in her expression. That can't be true. If Lena is in Boston, doesn't that mean you'd be the one to take over? I asked, and she looked down slightly. The truth is, Lena was supposed to inherit the guest house. She was trained for it, always treated as the first choice, while I was second. Even now, though I work here, I haven't been taught the basics of being an innkeeper like Lena was. I think maybe they're still waiting for her. Lena had been raised with the expectation of taking over, but after falling in love at her university in Boston, she defied her parents' wishes, got married, and stayed there. However, with her husband's recent relocation for work, without Lena accompanying him, Angela suspected their parents were holding on to hope. So, maybe that's why they haven't taught me anything yet. I found myself at a loss for words. I couldn't understand her parents' feelings entirely, but there was one thing I could say. If you want to take over, you should tell them directly. Angela's face looked like she was about to cry. But I might be a burden. And maybe they think I'm not fit to be an innkeeper. That's why they don't want to teach me. I gave her a smile. Angela, don't you sometimes overthink other people's feelings a bit too much? Angela tilted her head slightly. On the plane, when I helped her put her luggage in the overhead bin, when she assisted with Leonardo, and when she treated her niece, she always thanked me more than necessary. No matter how many times I told her it wasn't needed, she always expressed her gratitude. You should value your own feelings more, not just others. She gently placed her hand on her chest. My feelings. I smiled softly. If your parents really think you're not suited to be an innkeeper, then prove them wrong. Show them you are. Her eyes widened at my words. Then her cheeks flushed a bright pink. I've never thought of it that way before, but you're absolutely right. Her gloomy expression transformed into one filled with hope, and her newfound brightness lifted my own spirits. I stretched a bit. I need to figure out my own path too. If being a doctor isn't for me, then what is? Though I said it with a positive tone, Angela's face saddened slightly upon hearing it, but I responded with a reassuring smile. Let's both do our best. And with that, we returned to the guest house after the day's sightseeing. Back at the guest house, I relaxed in my room for a bit. To my surprise, the room had a small jacuzzi. It was such a luxurious space. After soaking in the room's jacuzzi, I also enjoyed the spa. The ambience was serene, and everything was immaculately clean, making it a truly refreshing experience. When it was time for dinner, I headed to the restaurant, where Angela greeted me in an evening dress. Mr. Williams, thank you for waiting. Her graceful movements caught my attention. Elegant, modest, yet strikingly beautiful, her features perfectly complemented the dress, and I felt my heart race, trying to mask the quickening of my heartbeat. I smiled. You look amazing in that dress. I only said what I thought, but Angela blushed. Seeing her reaction made my face feel hot too. Her way of serving was nothing short of remarkable. Before I knew it, my eyes kept following her. No matter how busy she got, her composure never wavered. She placed and cleared plates without a sound. If she noticed an empty glass, she politely inquired about refills without being overbearing. She responded seamlessly to guests' questions. I asked her about a fish I had never seen before, and she explained that it was a local river fish, even telling me about its seasonal availability. To say she wasn't fit to be an innkeeper was absurd. She seemed born for it. I felt a sincere desire to support her dream. I ended up staying at the guest house for 2 days. Though they insisted the stay was complimentary, I made sure to pay. Their hospitality more than repaid the kindness I showed Leonardo on the plane, as well as her tour. I considered staying one more day, but found it hard to leave. Even though I know I'll have to leave someday, just imagining walking away from here fills me with a deep, inexplicable sadness. It feels like there's a hole in my heart. Trying to shake off that feeling, I head to the spa. I take in each and every scene, engraving them into my memory as inspiration for the future. As I walk down a deserted hallway during the day only frequented by overnight guests, I spot Angela. She's rearranging the flowers at the entrance. Her complexion seems slightly pale, but when she sees me, her face lights up, and she walks over to me. Then, oh, she lets out a small cry before staggering. Angela. I rush to her side and catch her as she's about to collapse. I'm fine, just a little dizzy. Her vacant eyes and fragmented speech make me uneasy. While supporting Angela, I check her pulse, examine her nails, and look under her lower eyelids. Anemia, maybe. Is there a hospital nearby? When I ask, she shakes her head slightly. The hospital around here closed after the doctor retired. There's one 30 minutes away by car, but I'll be okay now. She presses her head lightly, and I furrow my brow. Don't push yourself. Have you been overdoing it lately? When I ask, Angela gives a faint smile. I may have been trying too hard. Wanted to make a good impression. I sigh softly, but am startled by her next words. For you, Mark. I look at her face. For me. Tears well up in her eyes. You're leaving soon, aren't you? I nod slightly. I had informed her mom, the innkeeper, that I would be leaving after one more day. It's lonely, but I'll keep doing my best. And you, Mark, keep being a great doctor. I was taken aback. I don't know. Being a doctor. Before I could finish, Angela interrupts with a small cry. You're perfect for it. She pulls away from my arms and slowly stands upright. Then she stares straight at me. With my niece, with Grandpa, and now with me. Someone as dependable as you. Giving up on being a doctor. What a waste, right? It's an overestimation. I avert my gaze from her earnest eyes, but her gaze pierces through me. Then she extends her pinky finger. Pinky swear. I'll get my parents' approval and become the innkeeper. So Mark, keep helping so many people as a doctor. Helping people. That was the reason I chose to become a doctor. Amid the stress and challenges, I had lost sight of that purpose. She had reminded me of it. I quietly extend my pinky finger. Years have passed since then. Mark, how is he? Does it look serious? Angela asks me, and I let out an exasperated sigh. No, just too much drinking. It's not alcohol poisoning, but I'll give him an 4. Can I use that room over there? When I ask, Angela nods and leads me to the room. Today, Angela called me over to her guest house because a guest had collapsed, so here I am treating him. Well, calling me over isn't much just from next door, really. Though I spent a few more days touring spas after our promise, I couldn't get that place out of my mind. I was worried about Angela, but there was an abandoned clinic in that area, and it stirred something deep within me. When I visited the place again and approached the clinic, I found a grandson of the former doctor tidying up the yard. Although the clinic had been closed for several months, the equipment was still in pristine condition. The former doctor's children and grandchildren hadn't pursued careers in medicine, leaving no one to take over. The grandson explained that the absence of a hospital in the area had become inconvenient for the community. After hearing this, I decided to visit the former doctor, now residing in a care facility about a 30-minute drive away. It was then that I made up my mind. I would work as a doctor in this hospital. I wanted to protect the lives of the local residents, the visiting tourists, and most importantly, Angela. When I told Angela about my decision, she leaped into my arms with joy. Her mom quickly stepped in to remind her to act with decorum. Angela, too, had been talking things over with her parents since then. The sudden decision by her sister Lena, who had always been groomed as the natural successor to the family guest house, caused her parents to reevaluate their assumptions. They realized that it wasn't an obligation for their daughters to take over the guest house just because they were their children. This is not something that should be taken for granted. Their daughters had their own desires and paths to happiness. Angela, who was thriving in her work, also had the right to leave and find happiness elsewhere. With this understanding, they stopped pressuring Angela, especially after Lena's decision to not take over the guest house. Angela, however, stepped forward and expressed her clear desire to continue the family business. From that day, her rigorous training as an innkeeper began. But Angela already had the foundation, as I had seen during my moving experience at her restaurant. Now, even when her mom takes a day off, Angela efficiently manages the guest house. After handling a particularly rowdy guest, I approached Angela. Aldone, what time will you finish today? Angela, who had been wearing her professional innkeeper's expression, softened into a warm, wifely smile at my question. I should be done by 9 p.m. Did you take care of the laundry? I nodded. Of course. I'll whip up some snacks. So how about we have a drink tonight? Her face lit up with excitement at my suggestion. I adored that radiant look of hers. Now my wife, more than anything. With the thought of her delighted expression, I headed back to our home.
Unlimited spa access from now on. How could John keep this a secret? That's just evil. I won't forgive this. It seems that, without my knowledge, my in-laws' place had turned into a luxury hotel. Now I can enjoy the spa every day and eat delicious meals. Just kidding. To think they would use my precious son for their own desires, they've got some nerve. They'd better be ready. My name is Amy. I'm a 35-year-old office worker. I work in the administrative department of a pharmacy. I live with my husband John and our first-grade son Edward. John and I met through a colleague at work. From the moment we first met, John and I just clicked. We quickly became close. It wasn't long before we started dating, and we were married the following year. With my upbeat husband John and lively son Edward, I was leading a life of ordinary happiness. There's another thing that makes me glad I married John. It's having his mother-in-law, Linda, in our lives. Having lost my mother early, I was raised by my father. Linda, who I barely knew as a mother figure, treated me like her own daughter since the start of our marriage. Amy, do you have any plans this Sunday? Why don't you and Edward come over for dinner? She would say, always treating us to delicious meals. When Edward was younger, she was a great support for my parenting struggles. She even helped pick up Edward from daycare when I couldn't leave work. Edward grew very attached to her. Spending Christmas at my in-laws had become a tradition for our family, including Linda. Amy, your mother-in-law really is the best, isn't she? My colleague Emma always listens with an envious look. Actually, it was Emma who introduced me to John. They have been friends since college. Emma, with her bright personality, has many friends. We joined the company together and are close enough to share work frustrations, family matters, and personal issues. The pharmacists and other staff are kind, and the company has excellent benefits. Emma, other colleagues, and I, all with children, continue to work as full-time employees, just as before our pregnancies. I think it's a really great company. Recently, John's been saying he has to work on weekends and isn't home even on his days off. I say, sounding a bit discontented. Are you suspecting him of cheating? John? Cheating? That's laughable. Emma laughs, but it's true that John has been away from home more often. Dad, are you working again today? Edward asks, wanting to play with John. I have to work, sorry, okay? Amy, I'm sorry too. John says, looking apologetic. I couldn't say anything back, feeling proud of John for working hard for our family. Little did I know back then that such dedication would turn into such a terrible betrayal. Working on weekends, rock, paper, scissors. Ugh, the worst. My workplace is usually closed on Sundays and holidays. However, about once a month, we are on duty for the hospital at our gate on Sundays. Accordingly, our pharmacy also opens. It seems that Christmas is our turn this time, and we all played rock, paper, scissors to decide who would work. Unfortunately, I lost. I wanted to spend Christmas at my in-laws. But no choice, I have to do my best. Once Edward started elementary school, I couldn't escape from the PTA, and unfortunately, I lost in rock, paper, scissors again and ended up as an officer. Really, this is just too much. I muttered to myself, only to be chuckled at by the friend sitting next to me. It's not funny, I said to her. She laughed and apologized, saying sorry. This woman is also an officer, and we met at the daycare. Her son Henry and Edward are very close, and our families have become friends. We used to go on trips together, though we've been too busy lately. Her husband Tom is also a kind and gentle person. Her name is Isabella. I call her Henry's mom or Isabella. By the way, Isabella, thanks for playing with Edward in the park last Sunday when I had to work. When I had to work on weekends, John would take care of Edward. Today I played with Henry in the park, Edward told me. When I asked John about it, he said that he ran into Henry and his parents at the park by chance and played together. Really? I asked John, but his vague response frustrated me. By the way, Linda called and said she's looking forward to Christmas. I can't make it, but have fun. I can't go because of work, so it looks like Christmas will be without me this year. Linda sounded very disappointed when I told her I couldn't come. But maybe I'll put John to work and have him do a thorough house cleaning. It's been a while, she said, sounding quite excited about the idea. Feel free to use him as much as you like. I laughed as I talked with Linda. It was close to Christmas when this happened. I was working a late shift that day and had to do some unexpected overtime, so I hurriedly tried to contact John, but couldn't reach him. I ended up calling my son's mobile phone. Mom, are you done with work? Edward answered the phone with a cheerful voice, happy to hear from me. Sorry, Edward. Mom is working late. Can you put Dad on the phone? But Edward said John wasn't there. Wondering where they could be. Hello, Amy? It must be tough working so late. John called and said he's going to be late because of work, Linda said. She told me that while she was preparing dinner at her house, John called her. Sorry, Mom. Amy's on a late shift, and I should get home early, but I have to work overtime. Please help. After saying that, John hung up and couldn't be reached again. I was furious with John's actions. He hadn't contacted me at all, thinking maybe he wouldn't get caught. I rushed home. John still hadn't returned, and at the dinner table were Linda and Edward eating. Linda said she was happy to have dinner alone with her grandson, even though I apologized. I really respect Linda. John came home late that night. Hey, about work. You promised to take care of things when I have a late shift. Can you at least keep that promise? I said quietly. What can I do? It's work. John raised his voice and even suggested that I quit my job or become a part-timer. When John met me, he praised me for working in healthcare. That John, who said such nice things, is no longer here. Our current lifestyle is also thanks to my income. Even though I'm an equal partner to John, he's been doing less housework and recently hasn't been taking care of Edward either. And this guy, probably. Hey, you're not cheating, are you? I looked at John with cold eyes. There's no way. You're overthinking, Amy. He suddenly changed his tone and put his arm around my shoulder. That said it all. John has always tried to appease me like this when he's lying or feeling guilty. How dare he cheat? He better be prepared. I was glad Edward was asleep. I didn't want to show our son such an ugly fight. From then on, we acted normal in front of Edward, but when it was just the two of us, we hardly talked or even made eye contact. When I told my colleague Emma about what happened, that guy is the worst. Let me know if you need anything. That's a cool thing to say. Days passed, and before I knew it, it was Christmas Eve. Take good care of Edward, will you? Say hello to Linda for me. I said that to John, but as usual, he didn't even meet my eyes. I'm off, then. With an indifferent reply, John and Edward left for my in-laws' house. What's with that attitude? It's so annoying. I spent a lonely Christmas Eve alone in our eerily quiet house. There was no contact from John, but thinking he was having a good time with Linda gave me a little peace of mind. I remembered Linda saying she'd make John clean the house. I wondered if he was being worn out by chores and couldn't help but feel a bit of schadenfreude. But little did I know, John was doing something unthinkable at that time. Christmas Day was busy with quite a few patients. Fortunately, I didn't have to work overtime, so I left work and went straight home. I planned to join my in-laws the next afternoon and spend the holiday with Linda. Might as well enjoy some alone time for a change. As I was thinking this, my mobile phone rang. It was Linda. Thinking it was going to be a complaint about John being lazy, I answered. "Amy, Merry Christmas. You must be tired from working on Christmas." "You did great." Linda didn't sound irritated, just her usual kind self. "Merry Christmas, Linda. I wish I could have spent it with you too. Is Edward just playing games?" When I asked, Linda fell silent. Even after calling Linda's name a few times with no response, I wondered if it was a bad signal. "Amy. John and Edward didn't come here this year. I spent Christmas alone," Linda said. As she spoke, Linda began to sob over the phone. I was in a panic. John and Edward definitely left the house yesterday. Where could they possibly be now? There was a long silence between Linda and me. "I'll head over to your place right now." It's about a 40-minute drive to my in-laws. On the way, my mind was filled with thoughts of Edward. What if they were involved in an accident or some incident? These worries were spinning in my head. When I arrived at my in-laws, Linda was already waiting outside. As soon as she got into my car, "Should we call the police?" I asked. Linda quietly shook her head. As I wondered why, Linda slowly began to speak. "Amy, I'm really sorry about my stupid son. Do you think John is having an affair?" Linda looked at me with teary eyes, and I almost started crying too. "What?" "Actually." That's when I remembered something and hurriedly drove to a certain place. When we reached our destination. "Hello, Edward? Is Dad nearby?" "Yeah, he's here. Come quickly, Mom." I called Edward's mobile phone, and he answered immediately. Even though we had been apart for only a day, Edward's voice sounded so dear to me. "Hello. What is it, Amy?" "I'm busy right now." I heard John's voice, sounding like he wanted to end the call immediately. Hearing that voice made me feel an intense loathing, wanting to confront him. "Linda, you said something about making him clean, right? So, are you at your parents' house now?" John's response on the phone was calm. "Yeah, that's right, Amy. I can't wait to see you." When did he become so adept at lying as easily as breathing? Should I have quit my job? Should I have tried harder at home? But none of that justifies an affair. "Oh. So, Linda, you started a luxury hotel? Does that mean unlimited spa access? How could John keep this a secret? I won't forgive him." I said those last words filled with hatred, in a very low tone. John on the phone seemed quite flustered. To his silence, I said, "Hey, come out of the room. This is the luxury hotel I always wanted to visit. You said it was too expensive, remember?" As I spoke fluently, John seemed to give up. "I'm sorry," he said in a barely audible voice. I found this place using the GPS on Edward's mobile phone. This hotel, not far from my in-laws, was the place I wanted to visit. The fact that John, who said it was too expensive for me, was enjoying himself here with his mistress infuriated me. Perhaps it showed on my face, because on the way to the hotel, Linda kept apologizing. I then found out for the first time that when I worked late shifts, Linda was almost always the one taking care of Edward. I hadn't noticed because she would return home before I got back. John, who is terrible at cooking, used to buy ready-made food, and if Linda tried to cook, he stubbornly refused her. Looking back, that must have been a strategy to keep me from finding out. Even during that short time, John was so enthralled with his mistress. Linda initially believed John was really working, but as his absences increased, her suspicions of an affair naturally grew. The climax was when Linda, asked to take care of Edward as usual, saw John walking arm in arm with an unknown woman, looking intimate. She debated whether to consult me but decided against it. The main reason was, I didn't want to lose the chance to see Amy and Edward. Linda sobbed in the passenger seat. Knowing she cared so much for us, tears streamed down my cheeks too. Linda was more considerate of me and Edward than John ever was. This time, John had contacted her, saying he would spend some rare time alone with Edward, but asked her to cover for him, saying he'd be at her house. Linda, suspecting a lie, worried about Edward and contacted me. I despised John from the bottom of my heart for involving so many people. At the hotel, after explaining the situation, we were made to wait in the lobby. Then, a man and woman with guilty expressions on their faces emerged, along with, Mom. I was getting bored. I played a lot with Henry. Next to Edward was his friend Henry. Henry looked around and said, It looks like my dad hasn't arrived yet. He seemed a bit disappointed. John's mistress was Isabella, a mom from the daycare. I wasn't sure how long the affair had been going on, but these two fools had boldly involved our children. Apparently, they had told their sons that their respective parents would join them later. How despicable. John had booked 2 rooms, one for the children and the other for themselves. So repulsive. Thanks to the hotel's kindness, Linda and I were allowed to stay in a room for a while, where Linda looked after the children in the other room. Isabella, having an affair with my husband and then talking to me normally at the committee meetings. I spoke in a calm tone. What? I thought Amy hadn't noticed anything. It was so funny. Isabella laughed. What is this woman? I never would have guessed that Isabella, who seemed so fragile and beautiful, was actually this spiteful. I stared at her quietly, pondering the unpredictability of people. John himself seemed a bit taken aback by Isabella's true nature. This woman, without being asked, happily began to talk about how and when she started her affair with John. Their relationship began when our children were in senior kindergarten, on a day I was sick and couldn't attend a parents' meeting, so I asked John to go in my place. It was Isabella who had made the first move. We had known each other as families and had each other's contact information. From that day on, they began to communicate more frequently. It started with complaints about their spouses, but gradually turned into personal conversations. Soon, they began meeting more often, and it didn't take long for their relationship to become romantic. But now it's all over. What a pity! Isabella chuckled. To her nonchalant attitude, I said, You seem quite relaxed for someone about to face serious consequences. Ignoring her surprised, eh? I stood up decisively. To my bewildered husband, I said, Come on, get up and check out. I've called a ride for you, so get ready quickly. I smiled slightly and left the room. Seeing Isabella's face twitch a bit from my remark felt satisfying. Now begins the hellish drive. The trip isn't over until we're home. After checking out, as we headed to the parking lot, Dad. Henry ran joyfully towards the person he was waiting for. It was, of course, Henry's dad, Tom, Isabella's husband. "Henry. Sorry to keep you waiting. Have you been good?" Tom said in his usual calm manner. "Dad, can Edward and I go home first?" "Mom and you need to talk," he said gently, and the two boys happily got into my car. "Thank you. We'll have a long talk on the way home," I said, glaring at Isabella. I had learned from contacting Tom that he was supposedly at work, and Isabella had lied about visiting her parents far away to come here. Both of them are utterly despicable. I was forced to come here. John threatened to use Edward to ostracize Henry at school if I didn't. Isabella started with a shallow lie. "Really? You seemed so eager to tell me everything just a while ago. Let's let Tom hear it too." I placed the voice recorder with our earlier conversation in Tom's hand. As she desperately tried to grab it, I said, "Don't bother. I have another copy just for myself." Smiling, I got into my car. From behind, John's pathetic voice called. "Wait, what am I supposed to do now?" John called out to me in a pathetic voice from behind. "Go home alone?" "Oh, but I thought you might feel lonely, so I arranged a ride for you too." "What?" I said this and pointed behind John as I drove away. Standing behind John were my colleague Emma and her husband, who was also a friend from college. Apparently, John owed him a big favor and couldn't stand up to him. I glanced over and saw they were already scolding him. Emma gave me a look that said, "Leave it to me." Though my husband was a disappointment, I was lucky to have supportive people around me. As I expected, everyone's ride home was hellish. Isabella desperately denied her relationship with John in the car, but no one believed her with the voice recorder playing. She eventually admitted to having other affairs. I don't know if John was serious, but he was the one being played from the start. The reason Isabella targeted John was so petty, because Edward got the lead role in a school play over Henry. I was furious. I planned to make him pay a hefty alimony. Henry's custody went to Tom, of course. He said he was going back to his parents' place, a bit far away. John came home late that night, looking like a ghost. Seems like he got a good scolding from Emma and her husband. John always said his college friends were very important to him, as if it were a mantra from the beginning of our marriage. Now, because of this incident, John probably won't be invited to their gatherings anymore. It's nothing but karma. He brought this upon himself. He should regret it. What angered me the most was that every time he met his mistress, John told Edward, "Today's a secret between us men, okay? Don't tell Mom." That's what he used to say. Edward kept that promise and never told me anything. When I found out, I was moved to tears. John and I successfully finalized our divorce. "You stupid man! How can you face your late father now? Don't ever show your face again," Linda said and slapped him. John finally realized the gravity of his actions and cried like a child. But my heart didn't waver. Afterward, John requested a transfer to a branch outside the prefecture. He paid the alimony and is keeping up with child support. As for me and Edward, we're living with Linda at her place. I considered returning to my parents' home, but my father has remarried and has a new family. Living together would be impossible. Linda suggested we stay with her until our lives stabilize. People are often surprised by our unique relationship, but I still cherish Linda like my real mother. I hesitated about what to call her, but I still call her Linda. We're keeping it a secret, but we plan to celebrate her 60th birthday at that hotel. I splurged and booked the most expensive room. This should turn the unpleasant memories into enjoyable ones. My job became far, and Edward had to transfer schools, but Tom's parents live near our former in-laws, so the boys ended up in the same school again. That was a surprise. Once things settle down, I might rent an apartment near work, but for now, I want to cherish this time a little longer.